All right, we're going to go ahead and do the roll call here. And at the end of it, if I did not call your name, I will solicit for that. So Angie Minetti, I just heard from her. She's on her way. Greg Blunt. Angela Levine. Nicole Wilkinson. Liz Ash. Wendy Brandt.
Yes, I'm on the phone.
Myra Ning.
Here.
Michael Steele. Carrie Askew Bailey.
I'm here.
Renee Wasserman. Kristen Power. Nicole Quinones. Carrie Thomas. Tom Myers. Holly Fermani. Kristen Alsted. Scott Reich. John Benton. Gavin Pendleton. Rick Brausch. Keith Kihara. Jay Cross.
Here.
Lady Lang. Megan Cambridge. Nina Saharazbude. She's here. She just stepped out a minute. Myself, Matt Evans. Monica Wagner. Ron Pelorin. Tommy Asu.
Here.
Is that you, Tommy?
Yes.
All right. Bob Fuji. Nicholas Oliver.
Here.
Drew Lausch.
Here.
Brian Neeser. Kristen Fitzgerald.
Kristen won't be on the call. This is Drew from headquarters.
Okay.
And Brian Knizer won't either.
All right. Thanks, Drew. John Schofield. Ed Ochoa. Margarita Padilla. David Irie. William Fallon.
Here.
Rachel Wagner. Paige Brokaw. Heather Tanner. Marie Wooden. Romina Scheiss.
Here.
Chair Vu.
Here, I'm on the phone.
Yeah. Michelle Henry.
I'm here.
Larry Sweetser. Brittany Adkins. Andrea Ventura. Heidi Sanborn. Edward Moreno. Carlos Gutierrez. Okay, anybody on the phone that I did not call? Please.
There's Matt Williamson and Chris Hennessy for Rite Aid.
Matt Williamson. And Chris what?
Hennessy.
Okay. Rite Aid.
Alicia Cotton for Walgreens.
Alicia Cotton. Okay. Anybody
Brian
else?
Lindman from US Ecology.
I'm sorry, I didn't get the name.
Brian Lindman from US Ecology.
Brian Lindman.
Yep.
Okay. Anybody else? Anybody in the room I missed?
Casey Miner with Walmart.
Is now joining.
Is that Casey? Minor?
Stacy.
Stacy. Okay, sorry, couldn't hear you. Okay. Okay, I'm gonna turn it over to give it to Megan Cambridge from DTSC.
Welcome, everyone. This is our last scheduled working group meeting, and before I kick it off, I want to extend my sincere appreciation for those who've spent countless hours spewing out their insides to try to put something on paper. And we've had some really,
Andrea Ventura.
Is now joining.
very, very important, I think, conversations with a vast number of entities who represent a lot of different opinions and thoughts. Coming up with a document such as this is not always going to provide the perspective each and every one of us thinks it needs to provide. So it's a little bit of I would call meatloaf at this point, because it has a lot of different components and it may not necessarily represent everybody's point. I'm very thankful for all the comments that we've received. I think I've incorporated them all to the degree that I think we can incorporate them. The next steps, of course, we have about 1 week left. Additionally, I'd like to call out my appreciation for Matt Evans, who's been part of an important part of our team, and Matt has accepted employment with another agency, so I'm very thankful for his efforts and going to miss him a lot. So I appreciate everything that you've done behind the scenes. The only reason this works is because of Matt and Nina, so I appreciate both of their efforts so much. The next steps are, what's that?
No, I'm quoting some money python. It's only a flesh wound.
You have a very thin document in front of you, because the goal of today is if we can get through this document in front of you, that would be awesome. What is missing in this document does not mean it will not be included, and that is all the problem statements. I think we've spent a lot of time with the problem statements. I would love to go through all of the problem statements again if we get time. Nina, I think, has placed all the problem statements in a new document, so if you need to take one of those home in case we don't get to it, that would be fine. But I think what is in front of us is enough for a goal for today. With that, I'd like to see, Rick, do you have some ideas how you envision maybe where we're going from here as far as our responsibility in getting this to the legislature?
Well, before we get into process, I do want to make mention of the fact that this document, as Megan indicated, is a group effort. And right now it is characterized as being the product of the group. And the group is, at least at this point, identified on the 3rd page of the document. That said, I don't know, and we haven't heard from some, so the level of comfort, the level of representation, the belief that the statements, the representations in the document itself
Is now joining.
is comfortably representative of their own views. Like I said, I think it's important for everybody to view this with an eye towards this document, when it goes out, will be a product of the group and everybody who's in the group. So the challenge of how we cast some of these issues, whether or not everybody's in agreement with how the issues are cast, is going to be, I think it's a sensitive sort of topic. I mean, I've heard from some, related to some of our previous conversations, some of the attempts at gaining consensus. So I don't know if we've struck the balance in this particular version yet or not. I strongly suspect we may not have, just from some of the conversations I've had. But in order for us to do anything to modify this document, we're going to need to hear from those who may not necessarily, who need to have their voice heard or need to somehow characterize or who need to qualify how this document is portrayed and whether or not and how they are represented by it through their participation in the group. Like I said, I only offer that as a caution and as a plea that as we move forward, if this moves forward as is, those members of the work group are, I guess we all own it, and therefore it's that ownership brings with it some measure of rights, and it also brings some measure of responsibility. So if in fact, as you read through this or the other portion at some point here in the near future, I need you to read it and view it with that eye. And please let us know. Because like I said, right now it's cast as a product of the group. And if there's some concern or disagreement with it representing you or your viewpoints being a member of the group, then we need to know. So with that, I guess some of the challenge, and just to be honest, the challenge of the workload, and kind of the convergence of many priority sorts of work that we're trying to do as a department and as a division are also hitting at us. So right now we're trying to get through this and trying to do our level best to try to facilitate the process and get the document done. Because once the document's done, it's now at least at this stage behind me, and I can look further forward down the road at other things that I'm sure will be pressing, possibly related to this, but not the document itself. So, we are, I think.
Rick?
Yes.
Oh, I didn't mean to interrupt you. This is Andrea. I think you bring up a very good and fair point. I'm one of the people who has been delinquent in providing comments, and there is an area where I am concerned and have thought, do I make comment on that, or do I just take my name off of the entire document? And I'll do that. It's been bad timing for some of us, both because of legislation going through and other things. But I think your point is well taken, that it is a question, because it's very hard to reach absolute consensus on all of this. There was a lot of good discussion, but you know, we are going to sometimes come to this with different points of view, and that's very hard to reflect. So I just wanted to put that out there.
Thank you. Michael?
Hey, Andrea, it's Michael. Excuse me, Michael Steele. I think if you have comments, it'd be really good to hear what those are. And I suspect that, well, from the way you describe it, it sounds like it may be just a portion of this that you find troubling. And we should know what that is and get it out there.
Well, these are things I have said in the group. You know, for instance, I don't mind re-looking at aquatic testing to see if it should be more modern and up-to-date in the science, and I've said that. But I also don't buy the argument that just because California does it and other states don't doesn't mean that California shouldn't do it. So that would be my comment. But it's nothing I haven't said already, and it's you know, it's just hard to get all of that into one document. I think staff has done a good job, but I do support a aquatic toxicity test that is unique to California. Other states should probably be doing the same thing, would be my argument. If they're not my problem. I live here, you know. So things like that.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, that's it. So that's the thing that jumped out at me on the area, you know, in the area that I would make comment on, and I'm happy to submit that. But in the end, if that's a very minority opinion that can't be incorporated there because there is a difference of opinion, then I'm comfortable not having my name on it.
Yeah, and so I'd rather try to build consensus than deconstruct it. And if modifying the language of the report to delete a reference to other states, which seems to me entirely appropriate that we should do that since it's none of our business, you know, we should do that. And I don't know that there's going to be a consensus against that. So. Well,
let's see. I mean, I'll send that in sooner than late. I'll send that in. I'll make that a priority.
That'd be great.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I would strongly suspect, like I said, even as I look at the compilation that we sent out through the issue statements and then the options to consider, some of them are more strong than I think I'm officially allowed to take in terms of a department. You know, I can't advocate for legislation outside my official capacity. So it's some of these, I think some of it's just smithing of the wording, just so it is more comfortable that it's not an absolute shall or should, but it is presented more as options to consider. Because I think many of us might actually be more comfortable if it's not presented as absolutes. But again, I invite that sort of feedback as well. Because again, I try my best from where I sit to put on the many hats of the many individuals who are participating in this group. And sometimes I'm successful, and sometimes, most of the time, I'm woefully inadequate at doing that. So again, we're trying to do our best to try to manage in the middle of a very diverse group, some who hold very strong opinions, and again, legitimately held positions. So there's no attempt or no intent on my part to disparage or demean anybody's positioning in this. It's just when you try to write a document that's representing that diversity, it becomes a very challenging element to try to balance it amongst the various people.
And I think we've done a remarkable job of building consensus and meeting that challenge. And I think to the extent that there are differences, those ought to be put out there. But where we can massage things to say they're options as opposed to recommendations. I'm fine with that too. I think to the extent we can at least identify our common ground, that's a really valuable undertaking. And I think we frankly have done a remarkable job given the diversity of the group. So I high five all of us.
Yeah. And I appreciate that, Michael, but and again, it requires that those who have opinions and feedback, please provide that, because I can't channel that which I don't know.
So this is Scott Reich. I guess we'll go through this. Can you just help me, because this does not look like a red line against the document that I last saw, so I'm wondering what it's red line against.
Sure, I'll be happy to do that. I know that, if I could just take a break for a second here, I know that, Tommy, your agency is only going to be able to be on the phone for the first hour, so please speak up within the first hour if you have things that you need to discuss, okay?
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Sure. Thank you, Scott, for that. Maybe part of the reason why it doesn't look like your red line strikeouts because a number of things have been moved and rewritten, and to the degree I possibly can, your language should be in here. One of the things that's not in here that is absent is the graphic of the chart with the recommendations. And that is not represented in this document at all.
Well, even if it's a move, that would be red line. I guess I'm just asking because, you know, as we're sitting here, it's natural for us to focus on what we think has been changed.
Correct.
But it looks to me like I'm looking at the executive summary I last saw, and I'm actually even noticing on AB 514, you know, I thought we took out the idea of recommending the legislation because Rick told us to, and there it is. It's not red line. So I just like to know when you ran the red line, what did you start with?
Okay.
So I can understand.
I appreciate that.
Whether I need to because I think I probably have to read the whole thing, and it's probably not accurate for people to just focus on the red line because it's not all that changed.
Okay. What I did take out of the document for the purpose of our discussion today were the deletions. And the reason I did that is because, for two reasons. Number one is that when the comments are in the side, including all the deletions, because I didn't do a physical strikeout, I deleted them. Even with a move, I deleted them. It made the print very, very small. I can get a copy of that I can pull the most recent copy that has all the deletions on it so we can see that for this purpose. This was for readability, and I apologize if it's caused conflict.
Well,
I think to Scott's point, just even some of the changes that we had submitted in response to feedback last time, like to your point, we had deleted the recommendation the legislature should enact AB 514, right? Because we had heard that feedback. And so that text is still here
Okay,
and not deleted. So that's part of the confusion, I think.
okay, that might be human error.
Yeah.
and that's allowed.
Trying to
I
get
just
down to the bottom.
But I just think it's important for us to know what we're looking at, what we're not, and also, you know, because Rick took the time to give us comments last time, I want to make sure you know we did take them to heart and we did address them, and
Right.
and it may not be reflected here, but I think it was reflected in what we provided.
Okay,
So we probably should run a true red line between this and what we gave you.
okay, we can get that document up.
I think that would be helpful.
That is on the... Yeah, we can walk through it as we're doing this.
And while Matt pulls that up, excuse me, so is the concept here to have this sort of short form report with the various problem statements as appendices?
No, the problem
Or-
statements are a separate section, and so they have just been printed and we've provided them.
Okay.
So Nina has those right now, so,
So those would be part of this as well?
They are
Those
definitely-
still survive. It's
Okay.
just that we were concerned about our ability to photocopy quickly and the technology which would have prevented you getting anything to look at as opposed to the half of the document
Yes, half
which
a loaf
was
is
ready
better.
to. So anyway, so our attempts at efficiency are not always apparent, not always successful.
Did they just knock us off the line?
No, you didn't. I'm sorry. We have a technical element happening, so please stand by.
You'll see the little.
So Michael, can you give him a little music?
La-di-da.
Oh, that music, I was lost.
All right, this is a version from about 2 days ago, so this is in progress.
But it may not have all of the.
It has all the changes up until yesterday, as of the 23rd. So there were a few comments that came in today.
Okay.
Okay,
So I think one of the litmus tests, at least recognizing the AB 514 recommendation, might be to look there to see whether or not that was in it or not.
yeah, no, it's not, those recommendations, anything that I kind of constructed since the 23rd.
No. So they recommended and had provided some edits
I
to
see.
this bullet, correct? Page 16. That's it. I'm just doing a litmus test to see if entirely possible still that it was just an error in. Go on.
That's too far.
514 would be the term that this.
I don't mean to make this harder for all of you, but not all of us can see what
No,
you're doing.
we recognize that. So what we're trying to navigate this real time. So hang on to Andrea. We'll.
Okay, but I can't webcast this. I
No,
can't get it on my computer.
Five one four. It would be earlier in the document, Matt. All right. Okay.
Need a reference in? That's okay. Sure.
Oh, but it's on my phone, so I
Represents.
Okay, so the version that we sent started in that section that said, recommends that the legislature revise
Section 5.4.
the MWMA to exclude cosmetics, blah, blah, blah. So we took out the specific endorsement of a particular piece of legislation. That's what we understood the comment to be. But I think, however we got here, let's just go through the document that we have and see what progress we can make. And I'm going to sitting here, I'm going to run a real red line just for myself, and I'll try to flag things for the group if I identify them.
So I believe when we first got started, at the end of, one of the results of last week's meeting, or last time we met, was one of the things we discussed is what was to be in the executive summary. And to me, an executive summary, and it should be an assessment of the entire document in a concise way. So to the degree, there were many sentences and paragraphs that were in here that went into great detail about what the various regulatory agencies were responsible for. For being concise in the executive summary, I happened to move that section carte blanche over to another section, which would be in the introduction statement. So you would see that information just found in a different section. Additionally, I made a sentence at the very bottom that kind of summarized what some of the options proposed are, because I felt the document still needs to have in the executive summary what our summary of all the options and recommendations are. Again, my assessment of an executive summary is you can look at the executive summary and from that pretty much know what the document's going to contain. So that was my goal behind that. Many of the things that were in the executive summary that are no longer here are found throughout the document. There were also areas that we found that we had repeated ourselves. There was duplication and there were some organizational issues, again, for the purposes of trying to streamline some of those duplications. I removed those from the body of the text. However, the problem statements in themselves, which are going to be in section 4, or for the most part left just the way that they had been submitted to us, with some contributions from others who have made some comments as well. Those problem statements are being Xeroxed right now, and we'll have a chance to look at those before we adjourn for the day.
Hi, this is Scott. I guess I wonder if there's a way to identify for us what you think were changes that we would care about.
Well, the first thing I think you would care about is the fact that there was a table that, Matt, if you can pull that table up, that gives recommendations. Yeah. It was in the executive. Right. Yeah. You don't see it. Okay, so I think we all know what that version looked like. It had a table that had been part of the recommendations, and then that it was pulled up to the executive summary. That table, there was a lot of issues that we haven't discussed about the table. If we can't, Rick has a copy of it, and it was in your recommendations part. Thank you. So maybe we should start there, Scott, to discuss, does this or does this not belong in a document that is does it actually represent what we're trying to say as far as recommendations? And I guess I open this up to everybody here. Not opposed to leaving it in there, but I have a lot of problems with the table. So, I'm not the authority whether to leave or not leave something in the document.
Were edits or changes offered to the table by you guys in response?
Yes, we made revisions and we moved it up in response to comments. And I think it would be helpful to have recommendations in the executive summary, if only because the legislation that we're acting under, I think, directed us to make recommendations.
I totally agree. We need to have those recommendations, executive summary. But I guess
The substance of them that you disagree with?
the substance, yeah.
Okay, well,
Because
let's have a substantive discussion.
yeah, yes. Okay.
Okay. Maybe take them one at a time?
Sure. Let's do that.
Okay. Left to right? I can go right to left. I guess the first one is the point of generation. I think,
Is this the edited version or is this the original version? Because I think we already discussed the fact that the,
Yeah, it's different.
the resolution box underneath the left-hand four.
Right, so
columns
that's not the
was
one that
not-
we sent you earlier this week, so. What? Special issue, this is what I have as what we.
Scott, I have that document, we're just pulling it up now. Okay, that's the one that was sent to us. Okay.
Let's look at the one that we sent you. So the first recommendation was developing interpretive guidance on donations and salvage.
Okay, so let's recognize that people on the phone
Don't have that.
this or track with the conversation. So we're going to figure out how to fill them in on what they're looking at.
No, this is the one that Angie sent to Nina, I guess, earlier this week.
It's what Angie had sent out.
Right. This
Well, we
2
sent it
days
to you,
ago.
I don't know if you sent it to anybody else.
Oh,
We sent it to you as the DTSC, and I think the understanding was,
oh, all right.
right, that's what we're supposed to do. We provide our comments to you, and then
Okay.
you post them, or.
Been better.
Okay.
So this one represents the Scott's, Michael's, the retail industry's edits to document that you had distributed. This is going to be sent out.
Matt is sending this out to everyone who's on the phone. But we call it, the document is called clean because this is a clean version of what Angie had sent to us without their red line strikeouts.
So Angie had sent a red line strikeout version. We just accepted those. So this.
No,
that's-
they accepted all those changes, sent it to us, so we actually had to decide what was red line striked out, and we had to compare. Yes, it was a clean document with no red lines.
Okay, she sent you a clean document, and I guess, but you have the original. That's what we,
Yes.
so you could
Yes.
run a red line one if you wanted to.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay.
I mean, I think she probably did that in her
No
defense, and
worries.
she's not here. It's because we moved whole things, and so you would have seen a lot of cross out and whatever,
Which is the same premise. by the
probably
way.
that you have.
All
Right.
right, we're all on the same page, I
Okay.
guess now.
So can we go to the substance? Yeah. So,
So since some of us can't see that, all I have is the clean copy draft from online. Is there a way to read what you're? I'm
Exactly what I'm gonna do. it's,
Yeah.
they're in little boxes, so it's not,
We're sending those copies out to you right now.
it's,
So you'll have
In an email?
yes, we're sending it to you right now.
Okay.
so
All right, good.
I'm gonna read the first one. I mean, they're in boxes in a table, so none of this is particularly long. The first one was for donation and salvage, and the recommendation was DTSC should develop interpretive guidance explaining that a product does not become a waste when it is transferred to a reverse logistics center. Can you scroll down, Matt? Or zoom out, yeah. When it's transferred, oops, okay. Transferred to a reverse logistics center for possible donation or salvage, even if the ultimate disposition is disposal.
What?
Such guidance should, however, prohibit sham transactions. I think I'll read that again because it was pretty disruptive, probably the way I read it. DTSC should develop interpretive guidance explaining that a product does not become a waste when it is transferred to a reverse logistics center for possible donation or salvage, even if the ultimate disposition is disposal. Such guidance should, however, prohibit sham transactions. So as you consider that language, keep in mind this is a table that's intended to be a summary, and there are several pages of discussion of the topic. So we're obviously not going to hit every nuance in a 1-inch by 3-inch table, but that was intended to summarize, I think, the discussions that we've had previously on donations and salvage with Jay and Ed and the group.
All right, so my first opposition to this, and I appreciate what you're trying to say, is when the work group is asking DTSC to develop guidance. and so it says should. Although guidance could be developed by a lot of different individuals, the guidance, we do that as a normal course of our business, develop guidance. And in this case, we could develop guidance. However, it may not be the specific language, because remember, we don't want to develop any guidance that we could not substantiate in either regulations or in legislation. We couldn't do underground regulations, for instance. So the little bit of wordsmithing, I think, would help that by not telling us what we should do and how we should say it. And that was my just
Yeah, and I
reaction
think
to that.
we heard that, so
reaction.
that, I think we might just need to fix the table, because in the text, we did change that. It
Right.
says the retail work group recommends that, and that's what the change that we had talked about last time, to move away from the should. And
And
so
so-
I think that's just the shorthand of the table is
That's right.
is
So
messing us up.
It just seems a bit schizophrenic for DTSC on the work group to
To
tell itself.
itself, you should do this.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's fine. So, so we did, I think in the text, and we can adopt that here, but does that give you less of a visceral? Because I think that's what we had discussed last time.
Yeah, obviously the devil's in the details, including the phrase, even if the ultimate disposition is disposal. I mean, I think we're going to have to work on the smithing of that. I understand what you're saying, and I understand the lengthy discussion that went in, and I also understand, and I believe you understand, because some of the concerns about the fact-based nature of some of this. So that being a kind of cast in a general way.
Right, so I think the challenge here, I appreciate everything you're saying. I think, on the other hand, we don't want this to just say DTSC should issue guidance on the topic, because that wouldn't really capture our discussions either, or recommend that we issue guidance. So there needs to be some substance as to what the guidance would be, I think, and we should smith it right now.
It's the difficulty of trying to capture in a table something which is a bit more complicated than just simply, simple concepts being conveyed.
I'm going to speak, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
maybe-
go ahead. I'm happy to delete the table.
me too.
Right? I'm not wedded to the table. I know Michael's the visual learner.
I love the table, but if it would bring peace to the
But it
world.
is-
Well, we could say should, we recommend that the group recommends that DTSC issue guidance on this topic, see section 3.4 for discussion of the substance of the guidance.
That might be a
That would
way to balance.
give you a table, Michael, and that would get rid of the wordsmithing problem.
How about some neutral language here about interpretive guidance is needed for that part? And then as far as the ultimate disposition, is there such guidance should however prohibit sham recycling and address ultimate disposal?
Yeah, I was going to make a comment around the same line. Maybe it should be guidance is appropriate, trying to separate where we need guidance versus where we need statutory change. And it's less about go do this DTSC, but it's if the legislature's looking at it, hey, you don't need to mess with this because we can handle it with guidance, but focus over here where we need statute.
And that's great. In fact, on page 15, we have that recommendation listed here specifically. And the purpose of the executive summary, again, if we can call out, I think, the top either consensus amongst all of us about what is recommended versus maybe some of the points that couldn't get consensus in the executive summary, I think that would be of value too.
And in defense of Megan, but also in defense of the fact that we haven't had time to really go through this in great detail, there still is, I think, a way for us to characterize these sorts of recommendations in such a way that it's kind of reflective of the group without being directive of any individual within the group. Because if you guys get to tell me what to do, I'm going to take a little literary license and figure out what I can say back.
Oh, excuse me.
Tongue in cheek. Never. I'm sorry.
So, yeah.
Those in the room can see kind of the sarcasm on my face. The rest of you cannot. So anyway, I just offer that.
And probably that should have said merely because the ultimate disposition is disposal, as I read it again.
And those of you online, just sent the new document, so we're on page 7. We'll try to tell you what page we're on if you're not on the webcast. Thanks.
So before we leave this, how would you summarize? Are we going to leave a shorter table here?
You mean
That-
in the executive summary?
Yes, ma'am.
I think, I believe possibly succinct bullet items in the executive summary, may be a better way to represent instead of a large table. But
Yeah, so I think it just to try to balance the visual learners and those who like to consent, a concise representation. I think formatting sometimes is helpful, sometimes it can be a challenge. So to the extent that say, everybody, I need to look at this. Assume for a moment we're going to try to shrink this down to some cross references or something and just kind of leave it at a more simply stated recommendation. I think if it's simply stated recommendations, the table might work. If it's somewhat of a long narrative in the body of the table, it may be a little less
Okay.
helpful in an executive summary.
Okay, so I think that would be great, and I don't know if I'm as much a visual learner as Michael, but I do like the idea that you can see which issues relate to the main topics that we introduced, point of generation and how they relate, because I think
I
you risk
agree the
confusing
relationship between the
people
two.
when you throw these out and act like they're completely separate when they're not. So, okay, so we will aim for a shorter version with cross-referencing in the table and see if that would work on that issue. Shall we move one
well, I
column
wanted
to the
to
right?
discuss 3 of the topics if I could.
Sure.
Okay. Especially empty containers.
Well, hang on.
Oh.
Let's go left to right, just because I think we're trying to make a progress in an organized fashion. So we'll get to empty
Okay,
containers.
so I'm going to read the second, may I
Oh, sure.
continue my narrator role?
Yes.
This is, I guess the way it's presented on the table, it's intended to cover the recalls, credit, and recycling point of generation issues. The legislature should modify California statutes to explicitly allow products that have been recalled, are being evaluated for credit, or have the potential to be recycled, to be transferred to a reverse logistics center for further processing, even if the ultimate disposition is disposal. This resolution also could codify DTSC guidance on donations/salvage. So that last comment, I think, was in response to a point Rick made at the end, which is if you're going to end up doing legislation, maybe it would cover the topic of the guidance. Again, comments on that would be.
And so I guess to just launch, this one is probably where the consensus around the recommendation is more tenuous. Tension between the various points on the various problem statements around each of these, I think we saw a bit more tension or difference. So the issue of representing as a work group, this one singular consolidated kind of recommendation that statute should be changed to allow this, I don't know. I could, number one, I can't recommend that legislative change. Number two, I think the issue is different for each one of those categories. I would say that there's probably closer consensus or at least some recognition of the issue around the recalls, especially the public safety recall sort of discussion. Manufacturer credits kind of pushes us outside towards the limit of that. And then recycling, I can't say we actually discussed at length. So coming up with a consensus or any sort of recommendation that is encompassing, that includes all 3 of those, becomes a difficult prospect to marry together.
Okay, so go ahead, Michael.
Well, is there a way to reframe it simply to say that to resolve these issues would require legislation, which is, I think, really what we were saying, without anybody committing to legislation that hasn't even been written?
So I'm not willing to say that the law doesn't already allow this. I think to achieve consensus, I mean, that is the consensus point, I suppose. There's a way to say it that doesn't. Yeah, there's probably a way to say this that doesn't violate that.
Yeah, you could say legislation could modify California statutes to explicitly, et cetera.
Well, the other thing you could predicate it on is if the legislature wants to endorse or wants to make a clear pathway for allowance to these activities, legislation would need to be enacted.
Or we could just say legislation could be adopted to XYZ. Then no one's committing to whether it's necessary or not necessary.
And again, it's not a consensus. There are some in the group that believe the status quo is acceptable too. So,
So who's
it,
that?
well, the status quo as far as our current laws and regulations function just fine. And so if we want to make a specific request to allow for specific things like you're trying to do up here, I think we need to balance the fact that we're not talking about all of the hazardous waste control laws that affect retail waste. That it has to be very specific as you're trying to mention. So I think there's some caveats that are needed here in this kind of statement.
Okay, I guess I'm sorry, I'm at a loss for words. On the recall, are there people who, let's just take it one at a time. I get your point on recycling, and as far as I'm concerned, we could take that out completely and just say it needs further study and take it out of there. As far as I think that's fair. We haven't really had a robust discussion of recycling.
Well,
I don't speak for everybody, but that would be my suggestion, and not let that drag everything else down, because it's fair to say we haven't had a complete
okay,
discussion.
how about
On
if I-
recalls, I guess, we circulated the problem statement, we asked for comments, we got comments. If there are people who think the status quo is okay, maybe we could hear from them. Because they're not talking to me, I guess they're talking to you. So maybe you could share with us where we don't have a consensus on fixing recalls. Who's opposed to that? I mean, are we doing
well,
this
again,
like in a candid way, or are we
Well, yeah,
hiding behind?
I'm not, I feel a bit uncomfortable. If people aren't willing on the group to speak out for themselves, I'm a bit uncomfortable kind of naming them out.
Yeah, okay.
However, I mean, what I can say is, I would say that DTSC is uncomfortable with at least the concept of the non-safety recall. I mean, I see where the safety recalls, the balanced public policy objectives of a safety recall and a system by which the safety recall can be monitored and implemented makes a lot of sense. It's where you get into this other area of recall where it's like, is that matching public policy goals and objectives, and how does the recalls implemented for other reasons fit into the public policy objectives that we would want to?
So I think in our problem statement, we had safety, defect, labeling, non-compliant. Those were, that by memory, is that right? So, okay, we have our problem statements, so we can look. Okay, yeah, unsafe, defective, mislabeled, non-compliant. So those were the 4 categories that we identified. It sounds like safety, at least speaking for yourself, Rick, safety is the one you're most comfortable addressing.
Right.
So defective, mislabeled, or non-compliant, which of those, are there any of those? Or whoever objects to them. It's hard to know what, our challenge, what we try to do is draft consensus. If people are unwilling to share their opposition, is very challenging.
Well, and there was an expression of concern, and we added the caveat that the term recall as used in this document does not apply to returns undertaken solely for seasonal or aesthetic reasons unrelated to any safety, defect, labeling, or compliance issues. So those 4 terms that Scott's referring to define the universe, and I guess the question is there safety, is defect, is it labeling, is it compliance? Which ones of those trouble you in terms of recalls? Or someone?
Well, you can also see how just its general characterization in a table like this, which does not bring with
Let's scrap
it,
this table because it's causing more trouble than it's worth.
but
Let's just
even
focus on the substance.
right, but even anyway, to kind of bring this together in an executive summary to cast these things in a general way is going to be difficult, right? Because the devil is in many of the details, so wrapping it up into an executive summary in any form or fashion is going to require a bit of finesse to land it successfully.
Yeah, I just want to make sure that if we haven't even defined the problem, then we got a big problem. So I'm trying to, and this is sort of daylighting this because of the summary nature of the table, which I'm perfectly happy to scrap. But if there's something in the problem statement that makes the DTSC or others reluctant about recalls, I mean, we really tried to thin it down to just stuff that really is truly, the difference between the voluntary and the mandatory, as we've explained, is simply that people don't wait for an order, they do it. There's not really a difference there. We tried to address the sort of voluntary but not truly a recall perhaps by these 4 defined terms. So where's the problem?
And well, you know, of course, we're charged with protecting public health and the environment. So obviously, anything that's under that charge is something that we fully embrace. Additionally, when it comes to things like protecting the environment, we talk about waste minimization. We talk about other kinds of aspects as it relates to that. However, if it's just a business operation, as great as the business operation may be, we have to look to what we are guided by under the Health and Safety Code and our purposes behind it. So and that's why I just say, if these are things that work for the business and they're ultimately good for the environment, I think it just needs to be captured that way.
Well, I thought that's what we were doing by saying that we wanted to address safety, defect,
Right.
labeling, or compliance
Okay.
issues.
And so
Well,
I
those
guess it's
all-
just a problem with the
just to-
table.
Yeah, so we're scrapping the table.
Forget the table.
Let's just make sure that
There's 2 parts of this. There's what we clearly say is in recall, and those all seem to me to have public policy issues, right? We don't want people using things that are unsafe, defective, non-compliant, or mislabeled. And then we, as Michael noted, I think in response to a comment from this group, people said, well, you know, maybe people are doing recalls for aesthetic reasons. We said, no, that's not what we mean. We hear you. And so we carve things out. So I guess, just reiterate Michael's question, what have we not addressed when we said this is only what's in, safety, defective, non-compliant, and what have we not fixed when we
So
said
if
what's
we go
out?
to page
Hi,
15,
Hey, this is Jay.
Okay.
Can I add something? So, like, you know, just to be, you know, as far as just getting the discussion going between recalls and hazardous waste control law. So here's what I'm thinking. So if you're recalling something for a safety reason, how would you, I guess, put that there's a conflict with hazardous waste control law? I mean, if something is going to be taken back, okay, I see where you were saying before, in, you know, previous meetings, that you need to account for it. You need to make sure that everything is returned properly, so that you can, you know, make sure you did a efficient recall. But isn't that something that could be done, not necessarily at a reverse distribution facility, but it could be done at a TSDF or a disposal facility? So in some ways, I think that the laws don't necessarily conflict. It's just a matter of how you take care of your recalls. Because I mean, I know that there are processes even in the, for example, controlled substances or controlled drugs that need to be destroyed. They can still go to a TSDF to be destroyed, and they can be properly accounted for in that process, in the manifest, in being received at the TSDF, and it's just a matter of how that's done there. So I think that the law works. It's just a matter of how that's done operationally.
And Jay, this is Scott. I hear what you're saying. I guess the reality is that there's no, as far as I know, there's not a TSDF that has the capacity to manage a recall. This is just a business that they're not in. They're there to dispose of things probably as quickly as they can. In recalls, things are collected, they're held for a while. There's accounting, there's credit, all those other things. I mean, you know, I suppose the industry, you know, business could have grown up differently, and somebody's business model could be to run a landfill on one side and a recall center on the other side, but we don't have those in this country right now.
But I think Jay's point, to be fair, is that there's nothing in California hazardous waste control law that prohibits
That from happening.
in INMAR from seeking a permit to conduct the very activity of, acknowledging under the current system hazardous waste control law, and managing it under the auspices of a permit. So I guess casting this problem really then kind of sits you in the midst of, there is currently no facility that is set up to do this, but is the problem that there isn't a facility that has chosen to go that route, or is the problem that the hazardous waste control law is prohibitive and would restrict somebody from being able to do that sort of activity?
Right.
So again, problem
understand that.
sits in the eye of the beholder.
Sure.
So how do we look at this issue as a consensus problem statement as opposed to challenge? So,
Yeah, I mean, I think, yeah, as Kristen was just telling me, it's not just that, that we don't have a permit, it also would require people to manifest and hire hazardous waste transporters. And it really goes to, the fact that retailers who are sending things back don't know many times, what's going to happen to it. That's why it's in this point of generation issue. I mean, they may know, they may not know. I mean, I think we know that the tampered, Tylenol is going to be thrown away. The other things, all they know is it's going back.
Right, but even by virtue of
We're dealing with the imperfect knowledge.
the problem statement, you've acknowledged that they're often discarded. So that is a relative and a non-specific term,
Yes.
but I think generally speaking, retailers won't take something off their shelf unless there's particular reason. And for recalls, some of these other categories, they're going to be taking it off under direction.
Yeah, but not knowing what's going to happen to it, just knowing that if someone wants it back, they're going to give me credit for sending it back, and they told me not to sell it while they do whatever they do with it.
Also, I'm concerned that we're sort of addressing a problem that's not presented by the problem statement. We never said that it's not possible for this to work in some other way. We said that the issue is that the retail stores are not the level at which to manage the recalls, and that they need to be able to send it to someplace. And right now, that someplace is a reverse distributor. The TSDFs do not have scanning lines. A TSDF does not scan each item that comes in. It comes in a drum and it goes wherever it goes. The manifest does not account item by item. It'll say that there's, RCRA F103 waste. It's not going to say 32 containers of 12-ounce this or that. So, a system could be set up, yeah, theoretically. It doesn't exist today, and today is when we're operating. So, I guess the question is there some risk to public health of the environment that is created by what we're proposing here? Not is there ambit within the existing law that a new system could be created. And I don't think we ever said here that it's impossible. We simply said it's not what's happening, and we need a pragmatic solution to this that protects public health and the environment, that deals with these unsafe, mislabeled, defective, non-compliant products in a secure way. And I haven't heard what the problem with that is, other than we wish that we didn't have to think about it.
But Michael, I guess from flipping that, it's like what you've not, other than the fact that there has been no one who's entered into the world of hazardous waste management and sought a permit to do so, there is no, the problem that one doesn't exist can be solved several different ways. One is a business seeing an opportunity to set up a business model by which it could service the retail industry and do this very thing, used with a marriage between the hazardous waste management requirements and the manifesting and permitting requirements and the scan lines, the various ways to track products and manage it in the context of the recall system and the tracking and monitoring and necessary dispositioning. That could be potentially an outcome that would also solve this problem of lack of a particular facility to do so. So therein lies the challenge of, it's like you say Rick, just tell me why my system won't work, and I'm going to turn it back around to you and say, Michael, tell me why my system doesn't work. So I think
I'll tell you why it doesn't, because it hasn't worked for the 15 years this has been an issue. You know, this issue has been out there. There were consent judgments that were entered 6 or 7 years ago, whenever it was, that said, let's work on this problem because it's a big problem. And, you know, so just, again, I'm not saying that we are saying that management within the existing legal framework of hazardous waste management, if one assumes that applies, which we have not conceded, is impossible. I'm saying here's a proposed solution.
Is now exiting.
So
So
that's why I say I'm not sure that we are addressing a problem that was presented. We're not, the argument is not that,
Can we look at the page of top 15? Because
David looks like he wants to
I think
say
you guys
something.
articulate that position fairly well on page 15
15 of
regarding
what?
products subject to recalls.
I've got pages 18 to,
No,
it's
first,
the previous document. It's the earlier one that's right in front of you.
and this is a problem state in the fact that you talk about the value of having a system with recalls for safety reasons, but it also highlights that they're not TSDFs. So I think this sets the stage perfectly for making your argument for having a system that allows for safety recalls, but here's the problem, you're not a TSDF. So I think you've set the stage here on this, on top of page 15.
And Michael, going to my example earlier, there are, I mean, I have actually witnessed it myself, where every package, every box, every, bottle is actually, identified, logged, tracked. It's shipped in a sealed container and then received at at a TSDF. So I know it can be done, and it has been done, especially in the pharmaceutical and drug manufacturing, where controlled substances are tracked from the time it leaves the facility, inventoried, numbered, and received at the TSDF.
that's true for controlled substances.
So this is David Irie. Instead of saying should, can it say could? The legislature could, and get rid of, I'm not saying get rid of the stuff about creditworthiness, but if we just do recalls, I mean, Rick's idea about TSDF works. I mean, it doesn't work for businesses, but one of the big problems is if you have one per store, 10,000 stores in California, then you have 10,000 manifests for 20,000 items being hauled to Utah, instead of being consolidated and having 6 pallets go to Utah, which is what happens with reverse logistics processors being able to handle it. But the table, I'm sorry, it says it's on. But the table,
Danny Offer
it says
is now joining.
should as opposed to could. So the legislature could do A, B, C, and D. Might be part of the solution.
Well, I'm sorry.
But my peers, some of my peers, not that my peers aren't at this table today, some of my peers that are prosecutors argue that it should be able to be dealt with at the store. So it's just part of your retail hazardous waste pickup. David Irie again. So that's just 2 things. First thing is, do you want 10,000 onesies? Or do you want 40 pallets going on a 53-footer to Utah? The second would be, can it be held at the store? The answer is technology exists for some companies. It doesn't exist for all companies, and it could be held at the store. Third option is legislature might consider modifying the law to allow third-party reverse logistics processors. So without grouping in creditworthiness or recycling, if you just did recalls as outlined in one of these documents in front of me, could consider, then maybe that's the solution. I was working off of the table definition, not this.
So we propose some language, or you propose some language on the bottom of page 15 which attempts to get at that, but maybe it requires some wordsmithing. And this would be one of, under section 3.3, options for managing surplus, which are basically the recommendations.
But again, recognize that as these are cast, there's either going to have to be a more specific attribution as to who in the work group these represent. Where consensus doesn't exist, it's going to be very difficult for everybody to sign on to it. And I get the frustration. This is kind of this is the definition of our challenge, which we faced for a long time. I get that. But at the same time, it's like, I think David's point, which is kind of additional kind of elements of the problem statement to kind of bring it through a more specific discussion, might be a way to manage some of the bringing it closer together.
But before Scott goes, I mean, my comment works for the entire working group. The legislature could consider modifying law. So whatever the problem statement is, it works for everyone that way. So maybe it's too simplistic.
Well, I guess one alternative is this is a collection of, where there isn't consensus. The other approach is to say, some people felt that the best way to address, I think it would be helpful to the legislature if we could at least, if people agreed there was a problem, so we should, if there's consensus on a problem, so maybe it's two parts. Where there's consensus on a problem, we should say that. Where there's not consensus on the problem, we could say, articulate that too. Some people thought this was a problem, other people thought it was fine, just the way it is. And then on the recommendation is, those who thought there were a problem thought that the solution was X, and other people thought that the status quo was hunky-dory. To me, that would be more useful than a document that doesn't provide any suggestions about anything because we can agree on anything.
I get that, and that's not what I'm advocating, Scott.
I'm just trying to slice it more finely, and because I do think if at least there's a consensus that there's a problem, that would be helpful to convey, even if there isn't a consensus on the solution. So that's my insight for the day.
And that gets back to my perpetual insistence that we talk about, get us to at least a synthesis of the problem, because I think that's one of the most useful things we could have accomplished here, even if solutions are yet to be found.
So with that different perspective, let me ask the question a little differently. Is there a consensus there's a problem on recalls that should be addressed? Or are there people who think that the system currently is fine and that people, prosecutors should be undertaking enforcement actions for people who are sending back things for recall? God forbid.
So I don't speak for all, David Irie, I don't speak for all prosecutors, just some of the prosecutors that do reverse logistics cases. And across the table, we fairly frequently say, we're not bringing safety recalls to a judge for injunctive relief. But that's not going to be the position of many of prosecutors in the state of California, but it is the position of my office, the Oakland County District Attorney's Office, is that if you're pulling Tylenol, safety issues off of the shelf and returning it so that it's not in the back of a store and can be put back on a shelf, then reverse logistics might be a great solution. But our position also is currently California law doesn't allow it. So it's the legislature may consider.
That's a perfect illustration of the fact that there is a problem.
No, understood. No, I get that, but also, what I'm not necessarily seeing is the problem statement capturing some of this conversation today, which is, does it specifically say that there is no particular location to send this stuff to right now? There is no legal, there is no authorized, there's no location that would conform to the hazardous waste control law currently as we speak. Does it say that explicitly?
It doesn't say that, and it will not say that. It might say that it doesn't conform to someone's view of the law, but I'm not going to say that there isn't, that it's not happening legally right now.
So
Right.
you're now beginning to define further where our challenge is, which is if we've got these positions, which I get why we have the positions, but coming to consensus
Rick,
around
Rick
positions.
is asking a different question, I think, which is there a means by which one could comply with an interpretation of California law that would require that recalls be sent to a TSD? The answer to that question is, yes, there's a means. We could find someone who wants to go into that business and get a TSD permit and accept recalls and scan them one by one. I mean, we could put that in there. Does such a facility exist? Not to my knowledge, but I wouldn't be willing to sign an affidavit to that effect. What is the standard business practice across retail in the United States? It's not to send it to a TSDF, except for controlled substances, which are managed through a separate system because of federal DEA requirements. So, as David has pointed out, there is a problem that needs to be addressed. And I wouldn't have a problem with a legislative report that said two options for doing this are to clarify that, in the opinion of the state, the hazardous waste control law applies to recalls and they must be managed on a one-by-one basis and sent off to TSDFs and so on. I know it's crazy, but I mean, if that's what they want to say, that
Born them
is
down,
one.
finally.
You know,
But I think that is at least a more direct brokering of the disagreement that exists. And again, to the point.
and I'm not even sure it's a disagreement because I'm not sure that's your position. I don't want to put you in that position, but if you want to say an interpretation or an approach would be to apply the hazardous waste control law to these recalls and start sending people to jail who.
No, but I also think that even in considering or presenting it in that way, in some form or fashion, there's got to be some sense or statement or recognition of consequence of that direction. Because ultimately, as David indicated, that has repercussions. So the ability to identify what those might be, even though it's legally possible, is it prudent, practical, the desired outcome, or what would the downsides be to that if it were to go in that direction? So that kind of takes, again, I realize that we're running out of time and all of this just takes time to kind of smith and characterize, but.
Yeah, I think we could add that.
Because I think some of the logical extension of kind of application of some of these things is in part where some of the problem statement was trying to get to, but really, maybe it did some, but not perfectly, but I think it would be helpful to see why some of these would otherwise be logical solutions to some of us. I mean, I've got a hammer. Why can't I use you as a nail? It's why that doesn't work necessarily, and not just because we don't like it or because we do it in 49 other states in a different way.
That's a point well taken.
That got through the next box. Can you go back to
I think he got through 1/3 of the next box.
the box? Yeah.
Skipped credit.
Yeah, so credit would be the next one. And that might be a similar sort of discussion, right? Although in some ways, it's like this becomes a little bit less definitively waste-like. I mean, you've got waste in that bucket, but it's not always waste. So this is the flavor of that category of material becomes more like product, less like waste, but you do have some waste in it, which causes the consternation and challenge, right?
Yep.
Is now exiting.
Is it possible to similarly present the credit discussion and argument? It's possible that shipments for credit could be under the waste rubric, but it has consequences. And so the alternative would be to set up some, allowance statutorily to allow it to go, irrespective of whether it's a waste or not, irrespective of whether it's hazardous waste, and the consequences of that would be. For instance, way to present the information such that I think it's just trying to balance the many different ways that this, anyway.
We certainly tried to do that in the problem statement. We can take another look at that, or people can suggest to us where we've missed the point, but this one was actually fairly carefully written and rewritten and rewritten.
Michael, maybe you have some suggestions here, because I'm thinking, and maybe I'm wrong here, but on pages 14 and 15, the goal of these were to take many of the problem statements or other kinds of issues that have been brought up through these 8 months and condense them down to a narrative that would set us up for looking at those options on 3-3, so, I mean, on section 3-3. So it was pulling out probably the meat of all those problem statements, and I don't think I've done it very effectively because the still section requires a lot more drafting. But the idea was to pull, because many of the issues within the problem statements overlap one another. And so it was an opportunity to pull those problem statements out and the consequences. And I would see being able to pull some of that and putting that into pages 14 and 15 as a synopsis. I do have to say, I don't believe that this is complete at this point. So there's still more drafting to be done there. And then it would naturally evolve into 3-3, where I've tried to highlight some of the options. And as Rick has mentioned, they need to be qualified whether or not they were a total agreement consensus or whether there was a variety of temperatures on that particular item. And again, I think this section requires a lot more work as well. So I just kind of want to qualify that. These are my initial thoughts about how to pull the information concisely into one area that can be reviewed. So my apologies for not doing a good enough job in pulling all that together.
I don't know that you haven't. I haven't had a chance to study this document at this point, but I get the direction that you're heading is to try to create sort of a shorter version in narrative of the overall findings and issues, and, seems fine to me. We need to look at it and compare it.
Yeah.
I just want to make sure there aren't differences on the problem statements. And the problem with our table here is it seems to be pulling things out that we've been through and that we had actually gotten past. So I'm really in favor of scrapping this table and making it just go away.
Right.
Andrea Ventura.
Is now exiting.
So,
Well, do we have consensus on?
do we have
on the table?
consensus on scrapping the table?
Yeah.
Like I said, I just kind of coming back to Megan's representation here, which was an attempt to bring and synthesize. The other comment I shared with her was that in many instances, the options do link directly to one of the problems, and so the difficulty of kind of just listing them as separate lists without joining or relationship makes it difficult to understand them or see them in the context within which they were offered. So
Can I suggest creating a table to? No.
yeah, we can create a table that would cross-link them. No.
Back to 423, I was rereading 423. It's pretty simple. Legislature says, this is a problem. DTSE convene a group, identify where all the problems are, and just give us some options that we can consider as the legislature for solving this.
Right.
So it seems if the problem statements are, to Michael's point, are we a consensus that the problem statements are clear and correct and we agree with those? Because once we get the problem statements, then if there's multiple options.
Is now exiting.
If we've set out options for fixing this, you have your own options for fixing this.
And others.
Others group, then just put the bullets under the problem statement and say, legislature, here are some options on how to fix this. But to me, that's responsive to 423.
No disagreement. And that's kind of where we're trying to drive this, but I appreciate the kind of bringing us back to that central theme of why we're here and what we're trying to accomplish. And so I think to the extent that we can kind of manage the formatting. Again, some of this was attempting to kind of respect the work that went into the problem statement development, and I think, largely speaking, if anybody has disagreement or concern with how any of those are cast, we need to hear now. Because to the extent that we excise the problem statement or a synthesis or synopsis of the problem statement, because if I look at some of them are relatively multiple pages, and which makes it a bit difficult for those of us with short attention spans to kind of grapple with. I didn't say that. I did not say what you're inferring. I was referring to myself. So anyway, so the idea is how do we kind of synthesize it into a kind of a brief statement of the problem? So again, I think formatting wise, as we look at pages 14 and 15, I think kind of melding those two together, brief synopsis of the problem, options to consider, and then to the possibility that we can offer pros and cons or offer particular perspective on why some of us may think it would work or not work. That might be helpful as well.
And if pages 14 and 15 look familiar, that's because much of that information was in your executive summary in the last draft that you had. So again, if it doesn't look familiar in its format, it's because a lot of it is moved just for the formatting purposes.
So having scrapped the table, maybe we look at page 14, section 3.2 of the document that you handed out this morning,
Right.
or this afternoon, and kind of walk through it and see if there are issues. I've walked through it while we've been talking. One issue that pops up is about 5 paragraphs down, but maybe we just start at the beginning to see if there are concerns about this as a summary for the legislature. And so we have suppliers and retailers often transport surplus household consumer products for consolidation at reverse logistics centers for possible donation, liquidation, return to vendor, and/or credit. No issue there. Such products may be disposed of by the retailer or the reverse logistics center for a variety of reasons, including product condition, while not broken or leaking, the product or its packaging is too worn to donate or sell, lack of a market, even a donation market, or at the supplier's direction.
If I could offer a suggestion on that
Yeah.
sentence, that actually focuses on the negative aspect of dispositioning, whereas I think you may want to at least balance it with the fact that some of these are used, reused, donated, surplused, find new homes.
Well, no, and the prior page says most consumer products are not discarded in the reverse logistics process. In fact, I mean, that's,
Just in the
didn't say it there. You want to say it
So
again?
we want to say it here in the
Say it there.
findings for the legislature.
Say it again.
Say it again.
Say it
Sam.
again.
Again,
Sam.
this is a synopsis, and so it does, I think it's fair
No,
to
I
say
think
it
that's
again.
good, yeah.
And I think if, to the extent that your sentence, your structure, your presentation should balance
Yeah,
itself.
yeah.
Otherwise, it's going to look like, I'm going to be focused on disposal.
Right.
Holy cow.
I think
You're
that's good.
TSD.
We'll suggest an edit to that effect. So then we get to, there's general group consensus that the reverse supply chain is not an appropriate method for managing broken and leaking products that are unfit for use for their original intended purpose. Agreement on that? Instead, these products should be managed as waste at the retail store level or wherever in the supply chain they become unfit for use for their original intended purpose, e.g. the manufacturer's warehouse.
So are you saying wherever they become damaged?
Yeah,
and leaking?
that was the point. So sometimes we get things from manufacturers' warehouses. If it broke there,
Right.
it stays there. It's not just a retail store.
Broken in
thing.
transit or that sort of
Right.
thing. Okay, it just opens up another enforcement case, but that's okay.
So that sounds good. Next paragraph. It is the responsibility of the retailer or the point where the product became waste-like for determining if the waste is defined as a hazardous waste pursuant to California laws and regulations in Health and Safety Code, et cetera, and appropriately managed.
Something's grammatically not right about that sentence.
It's not correct.
What section are
It is
you
a
on?
responsibility of, I think what we mean is whoever's got the material when it broke. I don't know, I didn't write it. Is the point, is that what we're trying to say is whoever's in possession of the product at the point it became a waste is responsible for managing it as waste? Okay, we can probably wordsmith that. I'm going to object to I don't think there's any reason to mention my client by name in this document, which I've noticed you did a couple times, so
I didn't, it was offered to us.
Okay.
Yeah, let's leave individuals out.
Is there a reason we went from RLC to RD?
I don't know. Yeah.
Can we get consensus, which is the better term to use?
Which would you?
You know, I followed Myron's suggestion and went with RLC for a lot of this, because I think you said it was that's the term that EPA used in the NOTA, maybe?
Yeah, so let's
I
go
don't
with
really
RLC.
care, probably there's a consistency value we should try to serve.
RLCs.
What's in our?
So most,
We have both of them.
most large RLCs are not authorized to accept hazardous waste. Such waste would need to be transported to a permitted TSDF for proper management.
I should define what a TSDF is.
Yes, spell out. Next paragraph. Some stakeholders assert that provided that the product is not leaking or otherwise prohibited from transportation as a non-waste, shipment to a reverse logistics center, an RLC, for processing prior to a final decision to discard is lawful. I guess I don't have a problem with that sentence, although I thought actually there was a consensus on that, but maybe not quite. Okay, further, until a final decision to discard is made, such products need not be shipped as waste, e.g. shipped under manifest to a regulated treatment, storage, or disposal facility of hazardous, even if their ultimate disposition may be disposal. However, the decision for how the surplus product will be managed depends on the facts at the time. What time?
I'm not sure I understand what's that trying to convey? I mean, the prior sentence is, this paragraph seems to be intended to provide industry's viewpoint on.
Well, actually, it kind of reflects what Jay said as well.
Okay.
I think that the however, I suspect, is because
That's the
there's
fact.
sort of the exit ramp for facts that are contrary to what we've set forth above, but on the facts at the time, I guess the question is what time?
We need to wordsmith that just a little bit. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Well,
I mean, at the time is at the point of generation
Yes,
where the
that's
person
right.
who has possession has decided it's a waste,
right.
has made the decision to discard.
Right.
So that at the time part is the part that introduces ambiguity. Next paragraph, some argue that retailers are discarding perfectly good and donatable products out of caution and their desire to limit potential liability exposure if eventually down the supply chain the product is designated as a hazardous waste. Pardon?
Discarded instead of designated,
Oh,
is what they're saying.
yeah, discarded.
I think we're
there's
going
actual
too fast. I think it
empirical
works both
evidence.
ways.
Pardon?
You need to be sure you want to make that change. I think we're going too quickly.
Mm-hmm. So, comment, David.
Designated is what you meant.
Some.
Yeah, because ultimately, its designation as a hazardous waste then has a number of handling requirements that apply long before it ultimately is discarded, disposed, so I mean, I think we're missing a paragraph between this paragraph and the previous paragraph.
What would that paragraph say?
I think it needs to acknowledge that because of the uncertainty around this kind of generation, retailers have chosen to avoid liability by exercising an abundance of caution and discarding products. It just needs to transition to this point of, it's not an argument per se, it really is,
Really
it's a
not,
consequence of, or
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
behavior that comes from a
So
circumstance.
it needs to have, the next paragraph, the in-between paragraph needs to have the other position. Others,
Well, or it needs to
No.
spell out the circumstance that is driving this discarding perfectly good donatable product, right?
Yeah, a little more explanation I think would help. Maybe it's just a matter of expanding.
Yeah.
Just expanding this paragraph that we're going to strike the first three words, some argue that, because it's really not an argument. And then we're going to explain why that's happening. Excuse me. So then we say, unfortunately, this action is contrary to waste minimization principles, which places burden on society.
Probably say that differently, but I
A
understand the
little
concept.
smoother, yeah. Other members identified concerns that the Reverse Logistics Center are placed in the position of making waste management decisions on behalf of the retailer. For example, some prosecutors have reported that goods intended to be donated to charities contain unusable products as a means of disposing of waste known as sham donation. So this is where I, as scanning through this, saw a problem. I don't think that this is an issue really for reverse logistics centers. It's an issue relating to sham donation, which is something that can happen independently of reverse logistics. You could have sham donation from a retail store. You could have sham donation from a forward distribution center. So
You could have it even under the auspices of it, whatever statutory construction you believe would fix this, for instance.
Right.
The idea of disposing via a donation pathway becomes,
Right.
that's a problem regardless.
It's a standalone problem, and I think what we need to do is say it's a standalone problem, and that whatever solutions we come up with respect to these previous issues needs to be mindful of that potential abuse and do whatever we can to minimize it.
Do you need to distinguish between where it was intentionally sent for sham recycling versus unintentional? Or it was sent there and it just didn't work, or something
Or
happened?
a chosen ignorance, I just don't want to know, so don't tell me, don't ask. Negligent.
Or it could have been with good intentions, but it just,
Yeah.
they didn't know any better.
You know, if somebody is putting broken or leaking items in the donation box,
That's obvious.
that's a pretty clear indication of sham donation. If somebody is sending pool chemicals to a urban shelter, that's probably sham donation too. That to me, you get to be so fact specific. I think all we can say is that it happens and that we need to guard against it, that it's not appropriate.
Saying it that way.
Question. I mean, we're trying to go through a smithing of a restatement of something which problem statements. Would it be possible, I mean, are each of the problem statements the sections, are they constructed in such a way that we could just lift directly from them and import here instead of rewriting something that was discussed at length in the?
I think that's kind of what Megan tried to do.
But again, she's
Yeah.
trying to synthesize it into a
Right.
cohesive, flowing paragraph that, constructed one paragraph after the other, as opposed to just, it's discussed in detail, in length, with all of the necessary information that kind of gives it that context. Is it possible to just kind of lift from that a paragraph that just basically succinctly describes it? Are they constructed in that way, or is some of them less so than others?
I think Megan really made a good effort at trying, and that's why I've been kind of going through this. But I think it's worth, we should all go through this in more depth. I wanted to do it now since we got the time and get stuff out on the table. But I think going back to the problem statements and looking and seeing whether there's some incorporation that we can do, that's a good idea. We might also have references in this summary that, a hot link that takes you to the the
What
section
section?
that's at issue.
Sorry, didn't mean to
That's good.
sidetrack.
So after sham donation, then we say the group identified possible conditions that would make a product incapable from being donated or salvaged. Little wordsmithing there. Incapable of being. Such donation or salvage is unlawful. Product recalls for safety purposes. Adulterated such that donation or salvage is unlawful. Mislabeled or not adequately labeled such that donation or salvage is unlawful.
I have a real quick clarification question on the mislabeled concept here. How does that differ from the mislabeled concept that drives recall?
So a product can be mislabeled because it has the wrong weight on it. It doesn't necessarily lead to a recall. It's not a safety defect.
Saying that that sort of mislabeling would disqualify it from donation or salvage?
Well, that's a good question. It probably wouldn't.
I'm seeing the same concept in both, and so help me out, help me understand.
Somebody else.
So I would say salvage for on the resale market.
But again, what we're saying here in this particular statement, and we've discussed it at length, and I didn't pick it up until now, so my apologies. But the idea is mislabeling is a driver in the recall world, something which is mislabeled, and so help me understand how that mislabeling, which you believe should allow it to go through the kind of that recall system, is different here. Or are you saying that mislabeling, even though it disqualifies for donation, would still potentially be allowed through the recall process? So this just...
Starting with saying what is not lawful for donation or salvage.
Right. So
Not talking about
It-
recall.
and
sometimes that's
not.
just ingredients, if it doesn't have the product name or the ingredients so that they can identify it as the product to be used for its intended purpose, you wouldn't donate that.
But it could be,
Sent back
that
for
sort of
recall.
mislabeling could drive a recall,
It could.
and in which case, then the recall provisions would kick in.
Right, and you couldn't salvage or donate
Could
it.
not salvage it.
Yeah, so I think it fits together.
I think it's
Okay.
almost saying that is a recall, not.
Correct. However, that recall couldn't yield its donation or salvage is very clearly waste.
Or it could be relabeled upon recall.
Right, if you have a recall for a product that says it does something, but it doesn't, it could go back and be relabeled and sent back out for sale.
Okay, I got it. I'm clear.
And then the last one was, does not have a bona fide use or reuse by others in accordance with California law.
Shouldn't that be an intended user instead of others? Your pool chemical to a homeless shelter doesn't make sense, but if you
Yeah.
send it to a school or a hotel,
What was the language? I'm sorry.
Instead of
intended
by
user
others.
instead of others.
Yeah.
By whom?
By the recipient, maybe that's,
How would a retailer know who the recipient is? And
Many tracked it. Many people in this room track their donations, have contracts with their people they give their donations to.
But this one is basically saying that doesn't have a bona fide use or reuse by others in accordance with California law. So
Well, Larry's-
this is an exclusion from the donation
Right.
salvage issue. So if
So it
you're,
has to be that it can't be used by anybody.
right. This is more encompassing than it can be used, it's a commercial product, can't be sold on, or it can't be given to an individual consumer sort of thing. This is encompassing, this is, can't be used by anybody. Right?
That's why I read
Okay.
it.
So I'm just kind of linking back to Larry's question of whether it's just a certain segment or if it's anybody.
So, sorry, we're striking the words by others? No.
No.
Okay.
Right, isn't that right?
does that address your, I think what, to put words in Larry's mouth, I think what he was saying was, if we use that pool chemical example, you shouldn't be able to, the pool chemical doesn't have a bona fide use by the recipient if it's the Midnight Mission in downtown Los Angeles. So he's saying pool chemicals have a reuse by somebody, but not the donee.
If you know the donee.
If you know the donee, right.
So you
But that's
can't-
where you get to the actual
But this is talking about
donation.
stuff which is essentially, we're talking about that being for donation or salvage sent from a retail to somebody, an unnamed RLC in this document. So therefore, that end user, end recipient, if you're putting that open-endedness back into the mix, where if the RLC sends it inappropriately to somebody, does that now cascade back upstream?
No. Decisions made at the RLC.
So as long as it can be used
Yeah,
by
so it should
By
be
somebody.
By somebody.
Then they can donate it.
All
And if
right.
it turns out that
And if
later.
the
it's
RLC mismanages, missends
Right.
it, that's a different issue.
Engages in some sham. Yeah.
Yes, a sham, yeah, that would be a sham donation.
Excuse me for a minute. I just wanted to tell the people online, I keep having it muted because somebody outside is not muted and it keeps, we hear a lot of interference. So if you were trying to say something, I apologize, but you're unmuted now if somebody has something to say.
Hi, this is Jay. Thanks, Matt. I did want to add, as far as sham donation, one aspect that that I was considering for sham donation is basically accumulating product or which should be waste, but delaying calling it waste where there's no real home for it. So that kind of ties into the discussion that you're saying.
Yep.
Thanks.
55-gallon drums of Battleship gray paint. That,
Lehue Sales in Stockton for 30 years.
yeah, kind of like.
I haven't seen that in retail waste, so we could talk about speculative accumulation or storing things for too long, hoping to find a donatee, but we just haven't seen it a lot. Maybe it happens, but I think that we should do big chunks, surfactants, donations, stuff like that, not one-offs. If the safety recall also has mislabeled items, what pocket does it fit in? That's just my 2 cents.
So we have this last paragraph, which doesn't show as red line. Read through it. Products subject to recalls are unique in that they present the need over consumer safety and consumer protection concerns, and the need to provide a secure process to aggregated, segregated, tracked, and evaluated prior to any disposal pursuant to hazardous and medical waste control laws. So that needs some grammatical work, but I think substantively, agreements. Recalls must be managed so that products can be lawfully returned to the manufacturer, supplier, distributor, or their agents, including reverse distribution facilities, for aggregation, segregation, quarantining, tracking, security, evaluation to determine whether there is a potential for repair, resale, or donation, and to ensure safe witness destruction if the product will be discarded. Some instances, these products subject to recall are also hazardous waste. Is it hazardous waste or just hazardous?
Hazardous upon
When
discard.
discarded.
maybe.
When discarded, yeah. When discarded. Because these entities who are receiving these recalled items that are also hazardous waste when discarded are not permitted TSDs, and in light of consumer product laws that offer a potential process for the management of these recalled products, comma, paragraph.
It's good to me. So I think that's,
Yeah, so take out the that in that last line, and I think, and put.
I don't know, I think there's an incomplete thought there still. Because these entities are receiving these recalled items,
True, it is.
are also hazardous waste, are not permitted, and in light, I think there's still,
There is missing something.
I think this is part of the dragging things over here, and
Yep.
Yep.
I can
Yeah.
guarantee you that.
So we'll look back at where that came from and see if we can fix it.
but I guess the other question is, it looks like you pulled over some discussion of donation and some discussion of recall, and then the section ends.
Yep, no manufacturer credit. I was
There's
about
no
to comment on
credit. Okay, so that would, but I'm just, in terms of the homework, that would be to do a similar synopsis of the credit issue
that. Medical waste.
and the medical waste issue here is the idea. So I think in our document, Michael, this is really what we tried to do in section 4, where we had, before we had the problem statements, where we had sort of an overview. Don't have our document. The executive summary. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Yes.
That was my attempt to do that, so it could have just fallen out. So,
Yeah.
one of us could do it, so.
So can we take on the obligation to suggest markup to this section? I can't. I can. Weekend.
Michael, what if we correspond over the phone and figure out who's going to do what part and how we could do this most effectively? Would that be fair?
Sure. The problem is Monday's a holiday. Even for us. So what's our deadline for trying to?
June 1st is Thursday.
Yeah.
We have some other reviewers too that we need to consider, so.
Been asked by some to document.
I think if we could go over some of, I've gotten a lot of the comments.
Uh-huh.
I could take a stab at this with some Rick's help, as well as try to turn something back around. I guess the biggest question for me is these options, because I think we have a lot of work to do on how we want this to look. And this is just a skeleton or a framework for how you might want to put it out. In no way am I trying to represent everything, so.
Did we go through the options?
I think we should. That would be very, very valuable.
Are we going to read through them out loud?
Yes, please.
Yes.
Okay. So the first paragraph, primary objective of the RWWG identified in the legislation is making findings and recommendations on regulatory and statutory requirements. Consensus was not always reached for many of the proposed recommendations based on differences in perspectives and current understanding, maybe, of the applicability of regulatory and statutory requirements.
Or how about agreement on applicability?
Based on difference, and I would say in lack of agreement on the applicability of regulatory and statutory requirements. To represent the views presented by members of the RWWG, various options for the management of surplus household product waste. No, I don't think we need the word waste. Products
Sorry.
are being presented without an assessment if the option is legally or functionally valid. Without an assessment of whether the option is legal or functionally valid. The options are not to be perceived as an endorsement by all representatives and may include opposing views. Status quo. The current regulatory framework for managing hazardous waste is sufficient for retailers and manufacturers to address waste management issues and affords the necessary protection for public health and the environment. Develop guidance. Regulatory agencies routinely provide guidance. Some members of the RWWG recommend that DTSC issue interpretive guidance. Well, I'm going to pause right there. I think if we're going to say this is what some people think, we should get that concept in the status quo. That reads a little bit more definitively than this paragraph does. Right, so maybe the status quo should also say some members of the RWG believe.
Yeah.
I think one of the challenges of just reading these as kind of a series of options is that it really doesn't help link it back to whichever one it might. Because some may fit better than others, or some may be more, so this idea was, although the guidance I think does hinge from the issue of donations and salvage, it might be helpful to.
This makes it look like you can pick whatever.
Yeah, this is a smorgasbord. Yeah, and I don't think that was intended. And again, this is.
No,
I'm sorry, I'm not following the point.
So these just list, without context as to which problem or issue.
Right, and I think status quo, probably that's okay, because there are people who think there's nothing to do for any of them.
Or there's some who think status quo works for some and may not work for others.
So, okay, so recognizing that, what would your suggestion be? Can we identify which problem?
I think it has more of a formatting challenge of whether or not we, in the prior section, we list a synopsis of the problem and then list the options for consideration under each one. And then list the next one, options for consideration. Next one, options.
So you're suggesting maybe we have a header that might say recalls, one that might say donations?
right,
Is that
so
what you're trying to say? And then,
So at least what I'm envisioning, a melded section 3.2 and 3.3, which is simply has a taking from the problem statement at large,
Pretty much what we
a
have.
synopsis of it, and then a list of, or a table.
Back to the table.
But again,
better
but
sense
the
of humor
idea
than I
that would
do.
then also be at that point to list, or at least offer pros and cons, which could be inserted with any of those particular options to be considered.
give me a format. Do you want to do this outside of this? Okay.
I think we could probably use the table to guide us in how we construct this. Put it in a narrative form. So I think to the extent that consistent with how the table was constructed and which particular solution or option was associated with which particular problem that was identified, we can try to organize this in that form or fashion. I think the challenge will be getting and soliciting and receiving pros and cons from anybody. Any particular, so if status quo is the choice for, say, let's make it a permit, the downside to that is, and who's going to offer, who's going to get us something to help provide that? Because my strong suspicion is if the legislature sees one option being status quo, they're going to say, cool, all right, I'm done. Instead of understanding where it might not necessarily work or where there may be limitations.
So are you envisioning for, let's just say for donation and salvage, it would say, we'd have the synopsis of the problem or whatever, then we would say have a section on options, and that would list them and have pros and cons for each of them?
Well, again, to the extent that there are options, which depending on who's offering any other option besides the guidance, it may be pros and cons for guidance could be offered. I'm just trying to envision how that may not be a good example to start with, but when it gets down to, is status quo sufficient for the manufacturer credit or for recalls? Pro of status quo in requiring hazardous waste management law to apply. What's the
So the answer to my question is, Yes, that's what we should try to do.
That's
That's your
that's what I'm suggesting. And I, like I said, I'm only a member. I'm not the ruling party.
Get that, Michael? Sorry. So Michael, the concept is to merge 3.2 and 3.3, and then under each discussion, have a discussion of the options that are relevant to that problem, and they just both describe the option, and then options, and then articulate briefly some pros and cons. So a con of status quo might be continued over management of non-hazardous materials or whatever.
I'm suggesting, Rick, that if you have an idea how you're visualizing this, since it's your suggestion, I would be happy to take a crack at it in the morning and then share it to see if I'm close to making this finding the way that you'd like to see it, as opposed to someone else offering to do it at this point. Michael? Okay. No, I'm sorry. I was going to ask Rick, because Rick has an idea how I'd like this to look. No,
Is now exiting.
You're right.
he does. So maybe I could take a crack at it.
Other high priority reports to write, but I'll get, no. You'll get a draft.
No, I'm just asking to lay it out.
Sure.
And then okay.
Yeah, so we will take a stab at kind of formatting this synopsis of the issue, various options that are available for consideration, doing our best to kind of shade them, channel whomever I need to channel with the best I can, characterize them, and then to the extent that anybody feels it's compelled to offer pros or cons, potential options that are put in there, then we are open to receiving those and incorporating those.
So as you do that, I would like to not lose sight of focusing the report on the issues. So we've got the problems. We'll have a section on recalls, and we'll say, here's the issue, here are the possible recommendations for or fixes, anywhere from status quo to, rewrite the law. I'd like to not lose track of the kind of global view that there are sort of these three buckets of key issues, the point of generation being a main one that spans several of the problems.
So some of the issues or some of the options could be encompassing, so that it's not just a one-off. So
and make it clear to the legislature, the real issue here is where's the point of generation for that basket of issues.
Which is what your table
It's what my
attempted
table
to-
was
yeah,
trying to do,
yeah.
so I don't want to lose the content there.
You could just group them into A, B, C, and then do 1, 2, 3 under, just do the right outline, I think.
So there could be one comprehensive option, and then under each sub.
Right, so you could have 3.2 is findings and issues, 3.2A is point of generation, and then under point of generation, you do the 3 point of generations. 3.2B is whether it's a waste, you need medical waste, you can do those together. I think even just that outline grouping will maintain the
Makes it more
categorization.
coherent for-
I think buckets are always helpful in these circumstances.
All right, identify that again for me. So we got 3.2.
3.2A might be findings and issues with respect, on point of generation issues.
Okay,
And then under point of generation, you're going to deal with donation salvage. It's going to be A1, correct? I mean, you pretty much do the outline as the table was, except that we're going to drop recycling out of that and put it into no man's land of further discussion. But
okay,
so if you go back to the table, you're just sorting things that same way and just calling the first column on the left 1, the second one 2, the third one 3, and then you're doing the same thing.
So then 3.2B is medical waste?
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Tracking with you.
Yes.
And these are the items that I have in the executive summary on page 4. Those are your 3 top items.
Right.
Okay.
Then the last is issues relating to hazardous characteristics, and you're going to put aquatic toxicity and containers.
So I can
see.
reintroduce that whole system back into 3.2. Okay.
Right. That's it.
organize it. Yeah,
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
You know what I feel like this document is missing? A conclusion. That just kind of ends with recommendations, and it just seems like even if we can re-summarize what the effectiveness of the work group is, might be a value. Did we really move anywhere from the time we started 8 months ago to today? What were
Years ago. You know, I
it-
write my conclusions once the rest of the document's done. It's hard to, but
It's hard to give a verdict until.
Yeah.
you see the
yeah,
outcome.
so, but I agree that that's a good goal to have a conclusion at the end.
I would like to say it was nice working with everybody. I could put that in there.
Yeah. We've really, I know it's been good for my Southwest miles.
You've had a few vacations, haven't
No. Hey.
Anywhere Southwest flies. Boise?
So, we talk about do you want to keep going through the document, or do we need to talk about schedule?
you? I think we've hit most, I mean, unless you want to go through some of any more of the options or anything that sticks out to anybody, but it's a bit.
Well, I guess the one I would like to hit on would be, discuss, is called Establish Authorization Pathway. This was brought to us in a different format, so some of this is rewording, and I'm not so sure that I caught it.
Yeah, we'll
One
need
of the
to-
things I tried to look at is the full spectrum that is available. If you look at it from a public health perspective, what I tried to say here is that for some of these recalled items, it is of value to have a pathway because the recalled items really support, being able to have an authorization really supports the opportunity for ensuring safety. And on the other spectrum, I introduced the concept of surfactants because we've spoken about that in the past, because when you think about a large quantity of surfactants that exist out there that, you bathe your babies in, I mean, we've talked about that for a long time. Is there a value to having maybe authorization for that? And those are points that were raised. I'm not saying I agree or disagree. I just wanted to try to capture that, and I may not have done a very good
Well,
job.
I think if I remember where that comes from, that was sort of the attempt to summarize originally the credit solution that was in the original bill.
We're on page 16 for the people online, for the document I just sent you.
So I think the concept is, I think we should summarize that as an option. It's not really limited to recall, so I think that probably needs some.
I would say that that's probably under the heading of establish a legislative pathway. There are many ways, I think, to construct
Right.
that legislative pathway. One would be exemption to take it out completely. Another might be to
Right.
establish it.
I think we would do in the write-up, similar to what the table did, would be to say, one solution to the point of generation issues would be something like that attachment that we sent that had the key elements of the pathway. And then you'd probably just say that a couple times under donation, salvage, and what's the third point of generation?
credit,
yeah.
extra credit.
Yeah. Recalls, right. So am I right? We're doing a bunch of reorganizing, and then I think the big difference from the last version is instead of making a recommendation, we're sort of laying out options as opposed to with consequences. Is that?
Essentially, yeah. Like I said, I can't tell you that I've had a huge swell of concern, but like I said, I'm trying to channel what has not necessarily come in through this discussion.
Yeah, that's unfortunate.
So does that path, I mean, is there any other point you wanted to raise, Megan, about that section? Any other changes? I have consensus that we not have the
I saw that too. I was like, whoa, when is this?
Oh, no, no.
Come on.
We'll add after a specified recess.
I want to know who proposed that option.
I want to have words with them. So,
Oh, yes, I did put that one in there. Yes, that's on page 17, top of page 17. It's just an option, and I did throw that out, and if no one here wants that one, that's fine, but I didn't know where we're going to go from here.
is there a limit to the number of cons we can list?
Let me strike it?
No. I suppose if there's one that it fits in.
I think there are some that continued discussions are going to be necessary. We've acknowledged that for maybe the Medical Waste Management Act. So,
Okay, so you may have received a second packet, a larger packet, the thicker packet that Nina printed.
They did not.
Yeah, they did, Nina. Oh, it didn't get printed? Oh, it didn't get printed. Oh, some people have it?
Have the problem statements.
Oh,
Yeah,
what
that-
happened? Oh, the printer's not working. That was my greatest. Okay, I just wanted to go over maybe not logistic, but go over what we intended to put in there, and I guess we could follow along on page 7 with the appendices, what we thought about putting in the appendix sections. And what we intend to list, and if everyone's all right with this, the Retail Waste Working Group scheduled meetings, we call that out. I think it's important to document how many times we met. To actually have the language of SB 423. It's not very long, so we have that as an appendix. We worked together to develop a glossary of terms, and I think you've seen that in previous drafts. We intended to put presentation materials. I know Michael gave one, we gave one, I think you gave a presentation. So if no one has any problems with our putting, that's already on the website. We intend to put that in the document as well. And I think someone had proposed to put the potential approach to manufacturers credit legislation. So I want to discuss that. I don't know who put that in there or why, and if it doesn't, I don't think it particularly relates to some of the discussion. So if we're going to have an appendix, it needs to relate. You're looking at me with curl
Yeah,
eyes.
well, I think it does relate to, it relates to a proposed, that's the pathway. That's
Okay,
what the pathway was
so all
intended
I'm
to
saying
summarize.
is, I don't have a reference to an appendix E, so we need to find it in the text where it
Well,
actually.
our
talks-
version did.
Okay, thank you.
So we also had the originally misnamed summary of EPA guidance was something that we submitted that I think our version had that as an appendix too.
Okay,
I mean, my thought is as long as we are accurate in what we say those things are, there shouldn't be any problem with
No worries.
attaching them.
yeah, because we did use that as. a
We also,
reference for-
I want to make sure these things are, we had some corrections to the glossary. There were some things that were blank I think Myron filled in some of those blanks. Did those make their way to you? Our comments had some edits to the glossary.
Right, so is it the version that Angie sent us?
Uh-huh.
Because it was a clean version? I couldn't tell what was
Wait,
changed.
so how
I
about,
was
it
going
sounds like it
through-
might be helpful. Why don't I run a red line between what Angie sent you and what we started with?
That would be a
So you can
because
see
I was
what we
going
ch-
line by line. I was like, I'm losing myself and all that.
I think she probably assumed that you would run the red line, but either way, I can run the red line for you, so you can see the differences between what you sent us and what we sent back, and you can see which glossary terms. And some of it was as simple as it said TBD next to the word.
Yeah.
And in other cases, it was words that we never ended up using, so that we suggested deleting them from the glossary.
That'd be valuable. Okay.
So just so I'm clear, we've got a lot of versions that are kind of simultaneously coming together, and so are you saying we're putting together a final version that we're going to look at as everyone's going to look at that one version, or because you were talking about one red line strikeout and then Megan was going to work on something on a formatting issue. So I just want to be clear I'm looking at the right one.
Well, yeah, there's two different things going on as far as I will try to summarize. I think that there's going to be an effort to take the version that was emailed today and update it to reflect today's discussion. That's one thing that's going to happen. The second thing is what I'm hearing from Megan is that she really couldn't tell what we had changed in the draft that we provided earlier this week because we did not provide a red line to her. And so to help her see what those changes are, I'm going to send her that red line. But that's mostly you'll have to now, I guess, for example, in the glossary, you might look at the glossary and say, I see what you changed. I love it. I'm going to cut and paste it and put it in this document. Or you might cherry pick and say, I don't like everything you did, and I don't know what you're going to do. But those would be your choices. So that red line is really just, Myron, for informational purposes, because I guess some changes didn't get made because I think Megan was trying to do this by sight as opposed to with a real red line, and obviously that's very difficult.
So the next version that gets sent out, does everybody want to see it as a red line strikeout or as a clean copy?
Red line strikeout.
I think it's, my practice is to send both.
All right.
Because the reason you like to give people a clean copy is because if they want to make changes, you'd like to see their changes in a clean copy.
All right.
So I would suggest we do both.
Yeah. My apologies for not doing that
No
for
worries.
today's meeting. Okay.
Well, I guess we should,
Everything, what you have in front of you today, that should be the base document from which changes are made. We will incorporate anything from the original Angie document into this or in redline and a clean version. This is one document. It was just printed in 2 packets. Megan, my only other question on the table of contents is this currently lists recommendations coming after the problem statements. On our discussion of section 3, will that remain?
The table of contents is not updated.
Okay.
It is severely out of date and
Okay.
because it has some formatting issues.
Okay, but the recommendations are now going to be incorporated in summary form up
Yes.
into section 3.
Yes.
Verify.
So just for final clarification, the 525 drafts that were handed out today are going to be the ones that are redlined against.
Correct.
But there'll be documents provided to DTSC that redline against earlier drafts.
Correct. And we will incorporate from those documents into this version to show as changes to this version.
So if one or two of my peers had time to look at this early next week, they would wait for the next red line, or they would look at these 2 May 25th documents and then know that there'll be dozens of changes,
Yes,
both.
yes. I'd love to save you time, but
This is Wendy. I apologize if I missed it, but what is the deadline for us to get edits back to you?
to the extent that you can get them to us latest Tuesday, because ultimately we're still trying to get something done by the 1st.
Okay.
We're still trying to figure out kind of logistically how a non-official entity conveys something to the legislature or whomever. So we're looking at process too, other than the silk pillow messenger. But yeah, we'll work that through too. And like I said, I don't know if, like I said, we'll do everything we can for June 1st. We will keep you all informed as we go down this path.
You mean the legislature just doesn't have a little mailbox you can stick it in?
There you go. Yeah, it's right out front with a little red flag.
Yeah. Okay. So understanding the 1st is Thursday, we need to get edits to you Tuesday. So my thought is whatever I have in my hands by Friday night is what I'll work off of for edits for Tuesday.
Yes.
And if you guys can turn one by Friday, that's great. If not, we'll work off of what we have.
Correct.
Okay.
But again, but as we discussed today, there are going to be some significant, yeah, so we will do everything we can, short of death or expiration, to get you something tomorrow.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Larry?
Tuesday AM or PM?
Later in Tuesday you push, or you push the system. Okay? I get it. You get Friday, I didn't realize you got a weekend. So end of day Tuesday is what we'll shoot for. That gives us all day Wednesday and
5 o'clock Tuesday.
EOB Tuesday. But anything sooner would be helpful. But we
Some of us have
recognize
longer
it's a
days than
weekend and
others.
it's a holiday weekend, and unlike Michael, some of us are going to take off. So with that, I don't believe everything else we're going to transact with the group will be electronically. If somehow, some way, something goes awry and we need to reconvene by phone, we will communicate as best we can. If there's need or desire or significant upset over whatever you see that you feel necessary, please contact us and we will work our best to figure it out. Change process and reconvene, we will do so. Everything else can be electronic. And again, as Megan started out the meeting, I do appreciate everybody's willingness to roll up their sleeves and work on this. If this were easy, we wouldn't have been convened to do this, I get it. I also appreciate everybody's tolerance for the poor humor, the tediousness with which I tend to go back around issues repeatedly, but hopefully it was worthwhile. And my hope is that whatever we come out with is helpful, meaningful, valuable, and leads somewhere to at least bring us resolution on the many things that we've been grappling with and path forward. So again, thank you all very much. Definitely appreciate it.
Thank you.